Today's daf we're going to learn is Ketubot daf samach bet, a super interesting daf with lots of stories, and basically all keeping in with this topic of how much a man is responsible to his wife in terms of their marital relations, how often, depending on the job, what issues affect it, and we're going to end with, well, not really end, but in the middle already, a huge slew of stories of rabbis who leave their wives to go learn Torah. Is this viewed as a good thing? Is this viewed as a bad thing? We have a series of 3 shiurim of Karen Miller Jackson will be up on our site. The first one's already there, analyzing these stories. So you'll see we're not going to have enough time to really go in depth to them fully. So she does a good in-depth analysis of them in some few short shiurim. So that's up on the site. You can look at that. And we'll eventually, probably only tomorrow, get to the story of Rabbi Chiya, which starts at the bottom of today's daf, which is the one that you're all familiar with. You might be familiar with some of the others, probably not all of them, and we'll learn them all together. So today's daf is sponsored by Jennifer Gerritz in honor of Phyllis and Chaim Lauer. And we're going to start our daf today at the words Amarav, about 10 lines from the bottom of Samach Aleph Hamud Bet. So we had a machloket in the Mishna. If a man takes a vow that he's not going to have marital relations with his wife, Beit Shamai says you have, up to 2 weeks he can do it, and Beit Hillel says only up to a week. So Amar Rav, there's a machloket Rav and Shmuel about how to understand this machloket. Machloket b'mefaresh. Rav says the way we kind of understood the Mishnah, which is if he specifies a week or 2 weeks, right, then they have a debate about it. Aval bistam, but if he just says, I vow not to have marital relations with you, Divrei akol yotzila alto v'yitein ketubah. Even Beit Hillel, Beit Shamai, who says you have 2 weeks, doesn't say we give him 2 weeks. He only says we give him 2 weeks if he specified up to 2 weeks. Let's say he said for 13 days, I'm not going to have relations with you. So that Beit Shamai will say it's okay, Beit Hillel will say no. But if he just said a random statement, I will not have relations with you at all, then he has to divorce her immediately and give her ketubah money. Even if he didn't specify an amount of time, basically doesn't have to divorce her right away. We can say, give him the 2 weeks according to Beit Shammai, the 1 week according to Beit Hillel, because maybe within that time he can undo his vow. Maybe he'll say, right, often people do this in a moment of anger. And when the anger subsides, he'll realize he made a mistake. Maybe he doesn't realize the ramifications. He's going to have to divorce her. So he could go to a rabbi, a chacham, who's the person who basically can annul your vows, and say, listen, the way you annul vows is saying, had I realized that, I'd have to divorce her. There's no way I would have ever said this. And therefore, he can basically get back his neder, right? Annul his vow and stay married to his wife. So basically, Beit Shammai says you have up to 2 weeks, according to Shmuel, from the time you took the vow. According to Rav, no, that wouldn't work. Okay, and according to Beit Hillel, obviously you'd only have a week. So now the Gemara says, why are you mentioning this machloket? They've already discussed this issue. It's none. Okay, what if he says you can't benefit from me, which basically means I'm not giving you food. This is a Mishnah coming up. It says, I take a vow, I'm not giving you any food. You can't benefit from me at all. So now remember, husband has to give her food. So what happens? So yom, parnas. Up to 30 days, he can put someone in charge of her food. Tell his friend or someone else in the city, say, listen, you give her food since I vowed that I couldn't give her food. Yotel mikam, but if it's longer than 30 days, yotzi v'yitein ketubah. So now they're going to have the same machloket. Is it for the first 30 days after he said this, or is it if he said it for less than 30 days, if he gave a time limit on the vow? So it's going to be the exact same machloket here. Amarav lo shanu ela b'mefaresh. It's only if he says, I vow that you're not going to benefit from me for 26 days. Says it like that, then he can put someone in charge. But right, up to 30 days. Aval bistam, but if he just said, I vow that you won't benefit from me, that sounds like it's forever. And therefore, yotzila alter v'yitein ketubah. He has to divorce her right away and give her a ketubah. Ushmuel amar filu bistam nami yamtin shem yimtza petach l'nidron. Shmuel says the same thing. No matter what, you have up to 30 days, because that's the time where he could theoretically, for that interval, make someone else in charge. And if that interval passes and he hasn't got rid of his neder, his vow, then he'll have to divorce her. But potentially we give him time to maybe undo the vow. Sricha. So now the question is, why do you need both? Comes the Gemara and says you need both. Why? Because the cases are different. The Itmar Baha, if you started with the first case, there's a big difference between marital relations and food. Food, you can have someone else be in charge of. You can't give your wife over to someone to give her right to have marital relations with her. So you would say, Bahaka Amar Rav, in the first case, Rav said he has to divorce her immediately because Mishum Di'ef Sharba Parnas, because what's she going to do for that whole week or 2 weeks, depending on whose opinion you hold by, right? If once the week passes or once 2 weeks, right, it's unfair to her to make her wait that long and not give her what she's deserving of. You can't find someone else to fill in for you. But when it comes to Mizono, De'ef Sharba Parnas, that in the meanwhile, until he decides whether he's going to annul the vow or not, he can put someone in charge of her food. Maybe they would say like Shmuel that really he gets to 30 days. V'id marba he, and now it's going to be the same logic but the reverse. If you only have the second machloket, then you would say what? Bahakam Shmuel. That's where Shmuel says we give you 30 days because he can put someone in charge of her food. Aval baha but maybe in the first case where he's not providing her with one of the basic needs of marriage and he can't hire someone else to do it, then maybe Shmuel agrees with Rav that he has to divorce her immediately because he can't deprive her for all that time. And therefore, tzricha. And that's why you needed to say that they actually have this machloket in both cases, and we really don't differentiate. But you could see the logic for possibly differentiating. Now, there was in line in the Mishna, what does that mean? Students can go out of city to learn Torah without permission. Permission from who? Permission from their wives, meaning the wife is against it, but they want to go learn Torah. There's nowhere to learn Torah in their city. So they can go without her consent for 30 days. To which the Gemara asked the obvious question, Bereshut Kama. Well, if they have permission from their wives, how long can they go for? Kama Debai, however long they want. And that's going to lead us to these famous stories of rabbis who left their houses for 12 years to go learn Torah, or maybe even 24. All right, we're going to see. Because if she agrees, then it's totally fine. Orcha demilta kama. But now the Gemara asks, and this is a very good question, what they're asking, what is typical though? In other words, what's expected? Now, some people say, right, often you might have this in your relationships, okay, whether it's with a husband or a wife, or maybe it could be with anybody, for all intents and purposes, a friend, or a parent, where you have, or your child, you have an agreement about something, they ask you something and you say yes, but you say it not exactly wholeheartedly. So maybe what they're saying here is if she agrees, there's a different debate among the commentaries, what exactly the question is here, but some people say if she agrees, but begrudgingly, she's not exactly thrilled about it, so then how long can you go for? So it's a debate exactly what this question is. Amarav chodesh kan v'chodesh b'bayit. This might not be the best thing for learning Torah, okay, but a month at home and a month learning and then go home for a month. Go back to learn for a month, go home for a month. Go back to learn, go home for a month. Basically, for every month of learning, be a month at home. Shne'emal, where does he get it from? Okay, we're going to learn it, interestingly, from David HaMelech. He had these people who worked for him who were soldiers, okay? These were, I think they're soldiers. Now I have to check. I didn't check. But they're workers of David. And they would go, okay, they would go month. Okay, it's pasuk from Chronicles, and that's how we get it. Rabbi Yochanan has a different approach. Amar chodesh kan u'shnayim bebeito. For every month of learning, 2 months at home. Where does he learn it from? Shne'amar chodesh yeh b'Levanon, shnayim chodeshim bebeito. This is when they were building the Beit HaMikdash, which maybe you can compare to learning Torah. It's different, but maybe there's a similarity. When they built the temple, so there were basically 3 shifts. One shift went, then the other 2 shifts were home. Next shift, other 2 shifts were home. So basically 1 month at home, 1 month at work, 2 months at home. And then, so now we're going to say, what does each one do with the other pasuk? Why didn't he say that? V'rav nami my time alor mahi shani binyan beit hamikdash de'efshar al yedei achirim. This is a very interesting line, okay, because it's not really clear why the other one isn't de'efshar al yedei achirim. Okay, why David's people weren't. I just want to check one thing here. No, okay. Yes, so it was, I see from the footnote here, it says that The servants of David were both his servants and his warriors. Okay. Whereas in the time of Shlomo, it could have been done by other people. In the time of David, it couldn't have been. Why that is a good question. Maybe you'd say war isn't the kind of thing where you could say, let someone else do it. It's a good question about, the whole issue in Israel about whether people should get exemptions from the army or not, right? Whether you talk about certain communities that don't serve in the army as a community, is that okay, right? Obviously, individuals that are not appropriate for the army, yes, but as a community, good question. Maybe it just means, because in the time of the Mikdash, if they had 3 shifts, it must have been there were enough people, and they didn't need more people than that. And therefore, there was enough of a population to do that. Whereas possibly when it came to the warriors of David, he didn't have enough people, and they had to work, month. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan, my time alarmar me'ahi shanehatam di'ilei harvacha. This is very interesting. Why did Rabbi Yochanan learn from there? Because the people in the time of Shlomo, got paid. Now, that's different from, one second. Sorry, the people who work for David got paid. Now, if you get paid, there's a whole different thing. This is something that's going to come up later as well. If you're the wife and your husband goes away to work and he's making a lot of money, right? This is very common, certainly in Israel and in other places as well, where people travel abroad to work, to make money, right? Certain jobs, in order to get the salary you want, it requires a lot of travel and it's sacrifice on the part of your family. But you're making money and, the woman can get extra help at home or whatever she needs based on the money that you're making. So it's okay for her. It's worth it. Okay. So that's why he didn't learn from David, because David and Melech, they all got paid. But when it came to learning, they don't get money for that. So they're not coming home with more money. So therefore she needs their presence more than in the other situation. So he didn't think that was a comparable situation. Now, some commentators say, what do you mean? Don't women, and this is always a tough source for me, but don't women get rewarded that their husbands learn Torah and they get that kind of reward? So first of all, you could say, well, that's not exactly a reward that you see, right? People like things that are tangible. You're seeing the money come in, you can use that. I think also, I read actually someone who wrote, I forget who commentary this was, but that the woman might get reward for learning Torah, but it doesn't make her feel as good as, it's like, okay, you get a reward, but it's not exactly something that's going to make her feel like, I don't mind that my husband's not home. So this theme is going to be a very important theme in most of our daf. We're now getting sidetracked for a minute. We're going to have a few sidetracks from this. And the order is a little bit strange in the Gemara because we kind of jump back and forth. This order makes sense because we already just had a machlok at Rav and Rabbi Yochanan about interpreting which verse do we hold by. And they're going to have another, which seems disconnected. But I want you to remember when we get to the end of the daf and we get to all these stories about this anacha, and we're going to talk about sighing and how sometimes being upset about something can actually be detrimental to your health, to your life, etc. And that's something that's going to come up, yes, as a theme. So this doesn't really seem connected, but we're going to see that this is actually really part of our theme today. Amarav, anacha shoveret chatzi gufo shel adam. If you sigh, right, sighing is a sign of being upset about something. This could be understood as something psychological, right? It could break half your body. Okay, it's as if you broke half your body. Shneimar v'ata ben adam he'anach b'shivro monayim b'merirut te'anach. This is a chapter in Yechezkel. One's going to quote one pasuk, one's going to quote the pasuk right after it, where they're talking about Yechezkel is supposed to basically be making this big sigh about the destruction of the temple to show how tragic it's going to be. So he's told, you should be he'anach, make a sigh, b'shivron monayim, that's going to break your loins. So Rabbi Yochanan, so he says, here you see, it breaks your loins, that's half your body. Rabbi Yochanan amar af kol gufo shel adam. It could actually destroy your entire body, as it says in the next verse. Shenemar v'yaki omru elecha al ma ata ne'anach. When the people see you sighing, and then they ask you, "Why are you sighing?" V'amarta kol shmu'a kiba, el shmu'a kiba, about the news that's going to come about the destruction of the temple. V'names kol lev, heart will melt. Rafu kol yadayim, all right. In other words, all the hearts will melt. All the hands will soften or weaken. Chiyata kol ruach, all the breath is going to go out. The chober kaim telech namayim, and all the knees are going to run water, like water. So here you see, it destroys your entire body. So Rabbi Yochanan nami hakti b'shivro motnayim. What does he do with the one that says only half your body, and it sounds like only your loins are going to break? Hahi dichi matchala. That's just the beginning of it, and then starts in the loins, and then the whole body gets destroyed. V'rav nami hakti v'names kol leh v'rafu kol yadayim v'chiyata kol ruach. Oh, don't learn from that pasuk. Shani shmuad Beit Hamikdash d'tekifa tuva. When it comes to hearing about the temple being destroyed, that is the worst possible news, and that could totally destroy someone's body. But a normal bad news and a sigh out of bad news is not going to destroy an entire body. Okay, so we have this debate about whether a sigh and being upset about something can actually destroy your whole body or maybe only part of your body. But it does show the effect of being upset about something, which is really our theme about these wives and husbands. And I also think that one of the biggest themes today is going to be really about communication between the wife and the husband and how important communication is. Even though the word never comes up, but you see it in the stories about this lack of communication that then causes the upset and the sighing, which then causes you'll see possibly the death of one or the other. So now we have this Jew and Gentile, idol worshiper walking on a path together. But the Israel is walking way faster than the Gentile. Now you're wondering, why are we talking about this? You'll see. So what does he do? Okay, it's almost like they're running in a marathon. I don't know. And the idol worshiper wants to catch up to the Jew. So what does he do? He says, do you remember your temple was destroyed? He figures if he starts mentioning sad things, he'll get the guy all sad, and then it'll distract him, and he'll walk slower, and the idol worshiper will be able to keep up with him. Nagid v'idnach, so the guy sighs. He says, it's very upsetting. But it still didn't help. He didn't catch up to the guy. So the idol worshiper was seemingly knowledgeable of what Rav had said. And he says, don't they say don't they say that sighing? Now you could say maybe this wasn't that he knew what Rav said, but maybe it was something known in the world in general. People said this, that sighs destroy half the body of a person. So I don't understand. Why aren't you, stopping to run? That's only new news. Okay, that's like when it happens for the first time. But this happened multiple times, right? It was destroyed twice. We had all sorts of other destructions. We're used to this, right? Once you get used to tragedy, okay, and we're going to say to Amri Inashe, and take this or leave it. I don't necessarily believe this. I will tell you that, and you can see what you think about it. But Demal Fatichle lo bahata, a woman who loses a second child doesn't go into a state of total shock from it. Okay, in other words, she's already dealt with one tragedy of losing a child. The second tragedy is not as shocking to her. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. I do think that in their day, things were different because they often lost children in childbirth. And I think that the concept, even though obviously we see the value of life in all of the sources and how important it is, but it's possible, again, only posturing, I don't really know, that the loss of a second child for a woman when you grow up in an environment where children are dying often might not be as tragic as it is nowadays, where it's not something that's expected. And therefore, for what happened twice, right, we all think that's the biggest tragedy, right? That's worse than worse. So again, whether it's meant to be true, right? This is someone's opinion about how that works. Or he says, this is what people say on the street. People say on the street then might not be the same as what people say on the street today. So basically the point is, this is a tragedy that the Jewish people, this you can certainly say, right? We're used to these kind of tragedies, not that they're easy to take, but first of all, he's talking about something that happened in the past, which also means it's not as, right? It wasn't directly for him. And also it was something that happened many times, so it wasn't as shocking to him. Okay, that was the whole aside. Now we're getting back to our Mishna. Tayalim b'chol yom. Okay, the way they I think it's in the Quran, they translate a man of leisure. Okay, men of leisure every day. So the Gemara really wants to understand what are tayalim. We didn't really define it so well when we got to the Mishnah, and now we're going to see a machloket about it. My tayalim amarava b'nei pirkei. There are those who learn. It's interesting. We talked about Talmidei Chachamim before. This seems to be people who learn like in the local yeshiva and come home every night. Those are men of leisure. They don't work physically hard. And that's the whole theory here is going to be, there's two issues that come into play in terms of when a man is supposed to have marital relations with his wife. One is how tired we expect him to be, and therefore say, well, if he's too tired, then he doesn't have to. Number two, it's going to be, is he in the house at all, right? Is he home or does he travel for work? Obviously, you can't expect him to be with his wife if he's traveling. And then obviously the question is, what are the limitations on his travel? So what are tayalim? Raba says, these are people who don't work physically hard during the day, so they're not exhausted, and they come home every night. Amalei Abaye. Abaye says, what are you talking about? They come home every night. Now he's going to derive it from a drasha on a pasuk, okay, as opposed to saying, let's see what happens around us. But he says, Man daftiv behu. Who is it referring to in this pasuk? Shav lachem mashkimei kum ma'acharei shevet ochlim lechem ha'atzabim. You're wasting your time. You people who wake up early and you go to sleep late and you work hard all day trying to make food for your family. You're eating lechem ha'atzabim. You're basically, these are the people who go out to work. They work super hard during the day just to get bread, but out of pain, right? Like it's hard for them, hardship. Kain yitain li'yedido shena. God is really going to give the reward to this yedido shena. Again, this isn't the simple reading of this pasuk, but the drasha is going to be, and even the translation doesn't really translate it that way. But I'm translating it the way that the drasha is going to translate it, that instead of those people getting rewards, it's going to be the ones who are called yedidei shena. What are yedidei shena? Amar Rav Yitzchak, elu nishtotehem shel talmidei chachamim. These are the wives of Torah scholars. Shemidnadidot. Yedido is minadet, like nadidashna tamelech. They stay up late. They don't go to sleep. Minadidot shena. They lose sleep. Me'enehem ba'olam hazeh. In this world, u'ba'ot l'chayei olam haba. In this world, they lose sleep and they get the reward in the olam haba. Now, why are they losing sleep? Because apparently they're waiting up late for their husbands to show up, and then their husbands don't even show up because they're busy learning, and then they don't even come home till too late, or they don't even come home at all. And so they've kind of wasted their sleep in this world, but God will reward them in the world to come because they've allowed their husbands to learn. So now, Atamart b'nei pirkei, in other words, the main point you're getting from this, besides, right, it's a little bit of a sad situation of these women, but what they're telling you is that the Talmidei Chachamim don't come home every night and have relations with their wives every night. Okay, or maybe they do come home, but they come home too late, and it's not true. So you can't say the tayalim or those people. Elam Rabbi Kiderav, the Amarav, Kigon Rav Shmuel bar Shilat. Here's an example of Rabbi Shmuel bar Shilat. De'acha mididei v'shate mididei. He ate of his own food. He drank of his own produce. V'gane betula da'panda, and he slept in the shade of his mansion. V'lo chalif pristika de malka abave, and the tax authorities never came to his house. Meaning he was a person who lived in wealth, didn't work too hard, so he wasn't physically exhausted. He had money, right? And he was able to make a living off of his own stuff, and he lived nicely. The fact that the tax collectors, I know, it basically meant he lived modestly also, like they didn't know him to be this super wealthy man. And he's this kind of person who's a man of leisure, basically. He had a good life, easy life, not too hard, didn't struggle. That would be someone who we would call a tayal. He gives a category of people, apparently existed, which is the mefunakim, the spoiled people of Israel. Okay, there were people, apparently, groups of people, apparently, who lived the good life in Israel. And it must be those people. And now we're going to have some stories about people that show, we're going to see people who seem to be very strong, okay, because it seems to be these are people who have, it's in order to be able to have relations every night, you also have to have strength. You have strength from food, from eating, and, like healthy people have good lives. They're saying basically, and have it easy. So now we're going to see the strength of two of these rabbis, which again, maybe they're in the category, these mefankim Rava, they were very strong and healthy. Okay, mainly they're showing their strength, which again, I think means you have to have strength to be able to have relations every night, requires a certain amount of strength. It doesn't mean, by the way, that these rabbis have relations every night, and that we're getting a list in the Gemara of the private life of these rabbis, but they're using these people as examples of a type of person who theoretically would come in that category, that again, if the wife is interested in having relations every night, the husband has to provide it for her. So Rabbi Abahu Havakai Beibani, he was in the bathhouse. Now the bathhouses in those days were built that the water was heated underneath the ground, which meant that once in a while, something like this is going to happen where the ground collapses from the heat and all that. So we're going to have a story like that. Havasam Kolei Trei Avde, he had two people who he would lean on when he walked. It sounds like he was already elderly. Ifchat Beibani Mitote, while they were walking, the whole bathhouse collapsed. Salet Salik va'askinu. He grabbed onto a pillar. Sorry, itrame le'amuda. He found in amud a pillar. Salik va'askinu. He pulled himself in, right, like a fireman, and he pulled himself up on the amud. And not only that, he was able to pull his two people who were helping him. Right, it's ironic. They were helping him. He pulled them up and saved them. So again, it's trying to show a person who had true strength. Rabbi Yochanan salik b'darga. Similar story. Rabbi Yochanan was climbing up a ladder. Havusam chilei Rav Ami v'Rav Asi. They were his escorts who were helping support him. Ifcha tadarga tote. The ladder collapses underneath him. Salik v'askinu. He somehow managed to get up to where he was climbing up to and pulled them up with him. Amrele Rabbanit b'chima achar dahachi lamalei lemisbachei. They asked the obvious question. If he was so strong, what did he need people to lean on? Right? Obviously, he was strong enough to pull them up. He obviously didn't need people to be leaning on. So Amar Luhu im ken ma'aniach le'itzikna. He said, I don't want to use up all my strength now. I'll leave nothing over for when I'm older, when I really get old. So that's why he leaned on people, so as not to use up all his strength. Whether that's true or not, whether that works, is a good question. Okay. Anyway, you're going to see a lot of stories later. Remember, these stories are often exaggerated. They weren't meant to necessarily be actual stories that happen. They're just trying to highlight ideas, concepts. Hapolim shtayim b'Shabbat. V'hatanya hapolim achad b'Shabbat. Our Mishna says if you're a worker twice a week. But there's a Beit that says only once a week. So how do we resolve this? Am Rabbi Chanina lo kasha. Kam ba'osim malacha b'iran. Kam ba'osim malacha b'ir acheret. Depends if you commute to work or you don't commute to work. If you're in the city for work, then first of all, there's two ways to understand this. Either if you're in your city, then you're home every night. And if you're outside the city, then you're not home every night, so you have to be home once every other night. Could be that you come home every night, but you're much more tired from the commute. It's exhausting, so therefore there's less expectation. And Tanya Nami Hachi, there's a Beit to support the reading of the resolution of this contradiction. Hapalim shtayim b'Shabbat, b'mitzvah l'morim, b'osim alacha b'iran, b'osim alacha b'ir acheret, acha b'Shabbat. That basically said exactly what we just said. Hachamarim echa b'Shabbat. Okay, if you're a donkey rider once a week. Amalei Raba Rav Chanina la'abai. Ichapatana lashwinan tayalu poel. Now they're going to say the Mishnah lists all sorts of other people that are once every 30 days, once every 6 months, etc. Now this machloket Beit Shamai Beit Hillel was about 1 week or 2 weeks. So now they're going to say, I don't understand. The 1 week or 2 weeks is obviously not relevant to the 6-month people. If you are a sapan and you go out on a boat for every 6 months, you come home once every 6 months, and that's okay according to halacha. So according to Beit Shamai or Beit Hillel, you should be able to make a vow not to be with your wife for more than 2 weeks because you're not there anyway, so there's no meaning to your vow. So why would there be a whole machloket Beit Shamai Beit Hillel about just certain categories of people and not all the people in the Mishnah? To which the Gemara answers, Amalei lo akulu. The machloket Beit Shamai Beit Hillel applies to everybody, even if you're only home once a week, once a month, once a year. It doesn't matter, okay? You still can't vow to do for more than 2 weeks or more than a week, according to Beit Hillel, to not have relations with your wife, even though you weren't planning to anyway. So the Gemara says, kamar, but how could that be? It says 6 months. In other words, it makes no sense what you're saying, that if my husband's a sapan, he goes on a boat, and he's only home once every 6 months, and he makes this vow that I'm not going to be with my wife for a month. Not going to work. Why wouldn't that work? So here comes a very famous line. It comes up in a number of places. We've already seen it a bunch of times. Someone who has bread in his basket and doesn't eat is not the same as someone who doesn't have bread in his basket. In this case, it's a woman who doesn't have bread in her basket, meaning a woman whose husband says, I vow not to have relations with you, even though he's not here anyway to have relations with me, but he's basically saying, I'm not interested in having relations with you. As opposed to, right, if my husband's away and I know he's coming back and he wants to be with me, that's different. I'll wait for him to come back and I'll be okay with it. But if I know that he vowed not to have relations with me, that's not a good feeling. Like this line, I always think it's like feminism is about having a choice, right? It's not about necessarily you want to do everything, but it's you want to be able to choose. If you have the options in your basket, right, you're in a different place than if you don't have any options, right? You might not want to act upon all those options, but anyway, it's a good line. Here comes a good question. Okay, and again, think about this, could be very realistic, could really happen. Amalei Rabba bar Rav Chanina la'abai, right? Sometimes things in the Gemara are not exactly relevant and practical, but this is very, very relevant. Hamal v'nasa gamal mai. let's say your husband was a donkey rider when you got married, and then he decides to be a camel rider. Now, right, what does this mean? It means they carry the wares on the camel or on the donkey. Now, a donkey rider makes less money. Okay, camel rider makes more money. However, the donkey rider comes home, right, and is home once a week. And the camel rider only has to be with his wife once every 30 days. And he generally travels more. So what do we think, right? What does a woman prefer? Is he allowed to basically go against her wishes? Can she say, like we always say, it's not exactly, but like a mekachto, right? I'm married, you thinking you were going to do one thing, and now you switch careers. This is a much bigger sacrifice on me. Or do we say maybe she's happy to have the extra money and she doesn't mind? So Amalei, even though we talked before about how important it was for her to make money, but still, they say here, Rotzai isha tiflut me'asara kabinu prishut. A woman would much rather have one kav, it's a measurement of food, and tiflut and playful relationship with her husband and a relationship with her husband, rather than 10 kabim and prishut and a husband who's just not around. Okay, it's interesting. This word tiflut, I see if you're helping me with the translation, saying it could mean intimacy. Right? It's very interesting, this word tiflut, because it comes up. Right? It's a word that definitely doesn't mean intimacy in all its contexts. Right? The most famous use of the word tiflut is the statement of, I'm forgetting if it's Rabbi Tarfon or Rabbi Shimon. Forget who said it. I should know this. But maybe Rabbi Eliezer. Sorry that I don't remember. It's like he's teaching her tiflut, which, right, doesn't necessarily, right, it means lightheadedness, it means, right, and it has a very negative connotation. Here, it actually has a positive connotation, okay? It's saying, this is what women are interested in, and in a good way. It's not saying it in a bad way. Anyway, it's hard not to think about that statement when you're reading this. Okay. So now, the main thing they're focusing here is on the words of Rabbi Eliezer, which basically means the entire Mishnah that we were talking about, all those different opinions about all the dates, is Rabbi Eliezer, which includes the Talmidei Chachamim once every 30 days. That's how we started the daf today. Now we're going to go back to that. Amarav Brona Amarav Halacha ke Rabbi Eliezer. So we paskins like Rabbi Eliezer, Talmidei Chacham is to come home once every 30 days. Amarav Adabar Ahava, Amarav, okay, Karen points this out in her Shiur, his name is Rav Adabar Ahava, right, love. Okay, but what does he say? Zo divrei Rabbi Eliezer. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Avach Chamim omrim, who don't appear in the Mishnah, but the rabbis disagree with him. Hatamidim yotzim leTalmud Torah shtayim v'shalosh shanim shelo b'reshut. They can even go 2 or 3 years without their wife's consent. Okay, it's Rabbi Eliezer. Thank you for pointing that out. It's Rabbi Eliezer who says Kol hamelamed bito Torah ilum lemdat tiflut. So thank you, Miriam. Okay, now according to this, he can go 2 or 3 years without her approval. The Rava says that the rabbis, there were many rabbis who relied on what Rav Adabar said, and now this is an interesting way to translate. Avda uvda, they did ma'aseh, meaning they acted. Binafshayu. Binafshayu literally means by themselves, meaning to themselves. They did it themselves. But binafshayu also has a double connotation. Binafshayu, with their soul, meaning they paid the price with their lives. Okay, and we're going to see, this is our telling about what is about to come. He had a Rav Rahumi. Okay, we're starting a bunch of stories. We're actually going to have a story, then we're going to go back to the Mishnah, and then we're going to finish up with stories. He had a Rav Rahumi. Rav Rahumi have a shachiach kamei de Rava b'mechoza. He very often went to learn with Rava in Mechoza. Have a regil dava ata lebeit kol malei yom de kippurim. He would only come home once a year on Erev Yom Kippur. Why is Erev Yom Kippur a strange time to come home? It's the one time a year that you're not allowed to be with your wife, right? It's a day that's forbidden by Torah law to be with your wife, right? There's also Tisha B'Av, but that's not Torah law. Anyway, he comes home Erev Yom Kippur. Yom Echad, Meshafte Shmata, one day he got carried away by his learning and didn't show up. Hava Mesachya debitu hashtaate. His wife's sitting there saying, he's coming any minute, right? We can all imagine ourselves in this scenario. I'm sure you've all been here where somebody, lo ati, doesn't come, chalish data. Okay, so now she starts to basically get nervous, right? We all start building things in our head. Someone's not coming back. We can't reach them by phone. We don't know where they are. We start imagining a terrible car accident, something happened. She starts, her mind is going to all sorts of places. A tear trickles down her face. At the same time, he was sitting somewhere in an attic, Ifchit igra mitote v'nach nafshe. The attic collapses and he dies. Okay, so first of all, what's very interesting, I think, about the story is for all the fact that they're disconnected, right? They're clearly connected, right? They're connected somewhere in their minds that he understands what's happening and he feels her pain and realizes his mistake possibly. Again, how you read the story is a good question. His name obviously is Rav Rahumi, which means rachamim, sympathy, which he doesn't seem to have in this story, right? It's almost like a mock, just like Rav Ava isn't really concerned about the love of the husband and wife from a certain perspective. Again, I can't say he doesn't really believe in it, but he is sort of saying he can go against her wishes and do what he wants, and we talk about the importance of communication, right? Here, in a sense, they are communicating, but in a very bad way, right? Only once we've gotten to the worst possible and they're not actually communicating face to face. It's like in some metaphysical way, they're in sync with each other, but they're really not in sync with each other. And he basically dies, and that's very tragic. Okay, again, these stories didn't exactly happen as they say. I'm just telling you, right? This is a story meant to convey a message. That on the one hand, the rabbis do say you can do this, but, and the goal of these stories is to say, really, communication is, again, I think the theme of these is how important communication is and making sure that she is on board with this. And if we go with that interpretation, I really liked in the beginning of Orcha de Milta Kama means even if she agrees, well, still, she might not be agreeing wholeheartedly. And you have to make sure that you're doing it, that it's limited. Okay. Onashal Talmidei Chachamim Eman. When are Talmidei Chachamim supposed to, if it's once a week, what day a week? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. Once a week on Erev Shabbat, Friday night. Asher priyo yitem b'ito. This is a pasuk which says it's in tayalim that the fruits will ripen in their proper time. Amar Rav Yehuda b'item Rav Huna b'item Rav Nachman. Yehuda said, or Rav Nachman said, or Rav Huna said, Zeh mishamesh mitato me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. There's a certain time, specific time. It's not just once a week randomly. It's in a particular time. Why that time? Because that's a day of enjoying your family, being together. You're more relaxed. It's a better time. Yehuda berei de Rabbi Chiya Chachinai de Rabbi Yana. We get another story now. Yehuda is the son of Rabbi Chiya, another tragic story. The Chatan of Rabbi Yana, that means he married Rabbi Yana's daughter. Hava azav yate bebei Rav, he would go to the Beit Midrash. V'chol beishim shehava ate lebeit. Every Friday, ben hashmashot, right before it got dark, he would come back home. He would always be preceded by a pillar of fire. Okay, fire is always the sign of Torah, and there's a bunch of stories where a pillar of fire comes with someone who learns Torah. Shows like it was a really good thing that he would learn all week, and he comes on Erev Shabbat. That's pretty normal, not so crazy. Anyway, all good. Yom Echad Meshach Teshmate. But again, just like Rav Rahumi, one day he got dragged into his learning and carried away and didn't come home. Kevan de Lochazia Husimana, Amarlu Rabbi Yana, because Rabbi Yana didn't see the Amud Eish coming, the pillar that always preceded him, he said, Kafumi Tato, turn over his bed, meaning, Yehuda Kayam Lo Bitelonato. I know my son-in-law Yehuda, he would never not come home because he knows his mitzvah of Ona. Interesting, the father-in-law is talking about this, right? Very openly. I know he should come home to be with his wife, and there's no way he would have done that if he were alive. He must be dead. Okay, so he presumes him for dead. He turns over his bed. It's like a sign that he's dead. Havai, we've seen this line before, Kishkaga hayotze milifnei shalit, which basically is another way of saying the power of suggestion, right? Once you put something into words, often it comes true. And in fact, nach nafshei, he dies, okay, as a result of this. Now, whether his words caused it or, right, there's different ways to understand it, but he actually dies because he didn't show up. And the nervousness that he caused, the nervous tension, right? Now, you would say psychologically the nervous tension causes the person themselves to die. In both these stories, it's he who dies because, right, basically it's saying God holds him responsible for the stress that he caused in the home. Again, not communicating. And both stories, he gets carried away by his learning and forgets to show up when he's supposed to, right? How important it is. This also shows the importance of when you're supposed to do something, you need to do it, right? The whole Mishna is all about intervals, right? How often you're supposed to be with your wife. It's very set, and don't break things that are set. It's very important. Rabbi, right, particularly in relationships, it's very, right? It's like one of the most common things in relationships, right? Someone commits to something and then doesn't do it, and how upset does that get you, right? Or things like that. Another story. Rabbi was trying to marry off his son to the daughter of Rabbi Chiya. The beginning of the story is a little strange, almost like a non sequitur. We'll see if we can connect it. When he came to write a ketubah, nach nafshei de Revita. The girl dies, the young girl dies. Revita is a term for a young girl. Amar Rebbe chas v'shalom psulaika. Rebbe starts to think. Maybe it's connected a little in terms of seeing that deaths often are caused by some unknown reason, but maybe there's a reason, and maybe we should think about why she died. Maybe this marriage wasn't meant to be. Maybe there was some problem with the lineage. So now Yativa b'ayne b'mishpachot. So he went to look at the yichus of her family and his family. Rebbe ata mishvatya ben Abital, who was the son of David HaMelech. She was married to David. So it comes from Malchut. Rabbi Chiya ata mishimi, achi David. And Rabbi Chiya's family was from the brother of David. So here you see, actually, good question. What do you see? Many different interpretations. This doesn't sound like it's a bad thing. They're not married. They're not related in the sense, I mean, so many generations that there's moms there issues or forbidden relationships. Anyway, it's unclear. Some people say that Shimi was not from Malchut, only David was. So maybe someone from Malchut can't marry someone who's not from Malchut, from royalty. But that we see, no one really says that. So it's a little bit strange. That's the basic interpretation here, that there was an issue. Some people say he looked and there wasn't an issue. Okay, why it's here, it's a very good question if that's the case. Even if it wasn't the case, at least if it was the case that there was a problem with the lineage, then at least it's trying to show when people die, there's some connection to why they're dying, which connects with the previous stories. Anyway, it's a very good question why this is exactly here, but it's really here for the next part, but you could have skipped the beginning part of the story. So then he tries to find another wife. So he goes to find the daughter of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra. So they say, fine, he's going to go first to learn for 12 years, and then he'll get married. But what happens? The woman, they have the woman pass in front of him so he can see who he's going to marry. He says, maybe we'll drop it to 6 years. Kind of has eyes for her and doesn't really want to wait 12 years. A second time she walks in front of him. Why don't I marry her first? Then I'll go learn. Okay, he obviously didn't really want to wait. He was a little embarrassed from his father, though, that he was like so desperate to marry this woman immediately. It didn't bode well for him. It didn't look so good. So Rabbi Yehuda, his father, says to him, Bini dat koncha yesh becha. You're like God, okay? You have the same idea as God. This is okay, and here again, we get to this idea of the beauty of marriage. No, it's good for you to want to be with your wife. God at first says, this is in Az Yashir, right? Bring me, right? First you will come to the land and then you will build the temple. And ultimately it says, in the end, God didn't wait till they got to Israel. He immediately said, build me a Mishkan now in the desert. So you see that God loved us so much, he wanted to be with us right away. He didn't want to wait. Okay, same thing with you. So this is, by the way, obviously likening the love of Torah to the love of God, which is obviously connected to this whole sugya, because we're talking about marriage and learning Torah, which are both relationships between spouses and relationships between person and God. So there's clearly a whole interplay here in these sugyot. This story, though, has a bit of a tragic ending, although tragic middle, I would say. So he goes to learn 12 years after they get married. By the time he got back, she could no longer have children. Terrible, right? Here he goes away. So I'm a Rebbe. This is a very interesting comment he makes. What should we do? Nigarsha, this is his father, remember. He says, if he divorces her, they'll say, this poor woman, she did this for no reason, right? She waited for no good reason at all. And maybe discourage people from doing this in the future. Right? What's interesting about his whole concern is it's all what people are going to say. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda was a very public figure also. If he brings on a second wife, it's a very interesting one also, shows there again second wives here. They'll say that's his wife who's having for children. And this is his prostitute who he just sleeps with for pleasure, but she's not providing him with any children. That's not a good situation either. So he prays instead, right? That's the best solution. He prays for her, and in the end, she's cured and she's able to have children. So in the end, it has a happy ending, but you'll see in these stories, they often go very tragic and they either end tragically, or there's like the fixing up of it at the end, which some people claim is actually in addition to the story to like not be so harsh a story, but and it's not necessarily part of the original version of the story. Rabbi Chanina ben Chachinai, he's one of the most famous. He wanted to go learn at the end of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's wedding. End of the wedding, he says, I'm going away to learn. So Shimon bar Yochai says, wait, and I'll come with you. Wait till the end of my Sheva Brachot. Lo Yaakivle. He didn't want to wait. He was so desperate to learn Torah. He's married already. He wants to leave. Azal Yativ Trey Srei Shnei Bebei Raps. He goes for 12 years. Again, this 12 years seems to be the theme here. Great line. Okay, this is a classic storyline. By the time he came back, all the roads were changed in the city. He can't figure out the way home to his house, right? It's trying to show this guy left for way too long, really, right? And he's not in touch with, forget about his family, right? Anything going on there. So he goes to the banks of the river. He hears this woman, someone saying, daughter of Chachinai, come fill up your jug and let's go. He says, oh, that must be my daughter, right? He doesn't recognize her at all. She must have been born either after he left or she was a little girl when he left. He goes after her. She was sifting the flour. She picks up her eyes. She sees him. She did not expect him coming. He didn't send a letter, didn't say, I'm coming home. She looks up. She basically faints and dies. Okay. She's so shocked that she dies. Notice also before they called her Aniyah. This poor woman, this is her reward, right? Look what all she did to allow me to learn Torah. Again, whether the story ends this way or doesn't end this way is a good question. Another version where it doesn't end this way. Anyway, he prays for Rachamim and she comes back to life, right? It could be also she just fainted. That often happens in these stories. They call it death. They look like death, right? When someone faints, they go unconscious. Anyway, it's a clear story of, problems communicating with your family. Okay, right? And it sounds like Zetolav is Eschara, right? It's exactly like that. Okay. Rabbi Chama bar Bisa azal yatav trei srei shnei bebei midrash. He goes for 12 years. Ki ata amal. This is a great line. When he goes, he says, Lo avi kedavi ben Chachinai. I'm not going to do what that guy did. I'm going to learn from him. Now, he didn't exactly fix all the problems, but what did he say? Azal yatav b'midrasha. So when he came back, instead of going straight home, what does he do? He goes to the local Beit Midrash. Ding, 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 right? What are you thinking? Why didn't he learn in the local Beit Midrash if he had a local Beit Midrash? We thought all these stories where they had nowhere to learn. Anyway, he goes also, you see, he's nervous about coming home. He goes first to where it feels comfortable for him. He's much more comfortable in the Beit Midrash than he is in his house. And you'll see the critique all the more so when you'll see what happens. Shalach lebeite sends a letter home. Ata Rav Shaya bere yativ kameh. His son Rabbi Yoshaya comes and sits before him in the Beit Midrash. So his son's in the Beit Midrash. He doesn't know it's his son, obviously. Haba kamisha leishmate. He's asking all these questions. This guy's really smart. Chalish feels weakened. Why does he feel weakened? Amal. If I were living here, look, I could have a child like this. If I had been home and been with my children, right? He starts to feel guilty. And he doesn't realize this is his child. And what else? His child got to this way without him at all. So what are you talking about? I could have done this. He clearly was useless, right? It has happened all without his being there. Al lebete, he goes inside to his house. Al bere, son comes in. So now his wife shouldn't be shocked. He already wrote in the letter that I'm coming home. The son follows him in. Kam kameh. So the father was already sitting down. He gets up for the son because he assumes the son wants to ask him some more questions. Who several the Mishal Eshmatakabai? He thought he was going to ask him some other questions. They followed him home from the Beit Midrash. Amrele debitu. The wife says, Mi ika abba dekai mikame bere. Is there a father who gets up for his son? She's so shocked by the scene. She says, there's such a clear, right? Everything's fuch here. Everything's upside down. Everything's not the way it's supposed to be, right? It's like she's imagining this moment when he comes home and they're all going to have a big hug, family hug, and instead of that, like, he doesn't even know who his son is. She realizes he doesn't even know who this is, and everything is wrong. Okay. And also, who ends up great in the story? The son who stayed home to learn is in a much better position than the father who went away to learn, thinking that was going to get him to better Torah, and he was clearly wrong about that. This is an interesting end to the story. Just a nice comment, and you would think the comments would be negative, but he says, Rabbi Yoshaya is the son of Rabbi Chama Rabbi Bisa. He is called the Chutum Mishulash. It was 3 generations of Torah scholars. Notice, by the way, he's called Rabbi Yoshaya. He's not called Rabbi Yoshaya bar Chama. which is very interesting because his father didn't really bring him up and have anything to do with his Torah learning. So we're going to stop here. We're going to start with the story of Rabbi Chiya tomorrow, which is going to be the counter to these stories, how to do this and do it right, because we already saw all the stories of where they did it wrong. Okay, to be continued, and you can listen to Karen's Shiurim. One of them is already up. One or two more will be up hopefully later today or by tomorrow. Okay, have a great day, everyone.